Chapter 1 of The Tale of Terror, A Study of the Gothic Romance, by Edith Birkhead. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Timothy Ferguson. Chapter 1 Introductory. The history of the Tale of Terror is as old as the history of man. Myths were created in the early days of the race to account for the sunrise and sunset, storm winds and thunder, the origin of the earth and of mankind. The tales men told in the face of these mysteries were naturally inspired by awe and fear. The universal myth of a great flood is perhaps the earliest tale of terror. During the excavation of Nineveh in 1872, a Babylonian version of the story, which forms part of the Gilgamesh epic, was discovered in the library of King Ashurbanipal (668 to 626 BC), and there are records of a much earlier version belonging to the year 1966 BC. The story of the flood, as related on the 11th tablet of the Gilgamesh epic, abounds in supernatural terror. To seek the gift of immortality from his ancestor, Utnapishtim, the hero undertakes a weary and perilous journey. He passes the mountain guarded by a scorpion man and woman, where the sun goes down. He traverses a dark and dreadful road where never man trod, and at last crosses the waters of death. During the deluge, which is predicted by his ancestor, the gods themselves are stricken with fear. Quote, "No man beheld his fellow. No more could men know each other. In heaven the gods were afraid. They drew back. They climbed up into the heaven of Anu. The gods crouched like dogs. They cowered by the walls." End quote. Another episode in the same epic, when Nergal, the god of the dead, brings before Gilgamesh an apparition of his friend Eabani, recalls the impressive scene when the Witch of Endor summons the spirit of Samuel before Saul. When legends began to grow up around the names of traditional heroes, fierce encounters with giants and monsters were invented to glorify their strength and prowess. David, with a stone from his sling, slew Goliath. The crafty Ulysses put out the eye of Polyphemus. Grettir, according to Icelandic saga, overcame Glam, the malevolent, death-dealing vampire who went riding the roofs. Beowulf fearlessly descended into the turbid mere to grapple with Grendel's mother. Folk tales and ballads, in which incidents similar to those in myths and heroic legends occur, are often overshadowed by terror. Figures like the demon lover who bears off his mistress in the fatal craft and sinks her in the sea, and the cannibal bridegroom outwitted at the last by the artfulness of one of his brides, appear in the folklore of many lands. Through every century there glide uneasy spirits, groaning for vengeance. Andrew Lang mentions the existence of a papyrus fragment found attached to a wooden statuette, in which an ancient Egyptian scribe addresses a letter to the Khu, or spirit, of his dead wife, beseeching her not to haunt him. One of the ancestors of the savage werewolf, who figures in Marryat's Phantom Ship, may perhaps be discovered in Petronius's Supper of Trimalchio. The descent of Bram Stoker's infamous vampire Dracula may be traced back through centuries of legend. Hobgoblins, demons and witches mingle grotesquely with the throng of beautiful princesses, queens in glittering raiment, fairies and elves. Without these ugly figures, folk tales would soon lose their power to charm. All tale-tellers know that fear is a potent spell. The curiosity which drove Bluebeard's wife to explore the hidden chamber lures us on to know the worst, and as we listen to horrid stories we snatch a fearful joy. Human nature desires not only to be amused and entertained, but moved to pity and fear. All can sympathise with the youth who could not shudder and would fain acquire the gift. From English literature we gain no more than brief, tantalising glimpses of the vast treasury of folk tales and ballads that existed before literature became an art, and that lived side by side with it, vitalising and enriching it continually. Yet here and there we catch sudden gleams, like the fragment in King Lear, quote, "Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came, his words still fie, foe and fum, I smell the blood of a British man." Or Benedick's quotation from The Robber Bridegroom, "It is not so, it was not so, but indeed God forbid that it should be so," which hint at the existence of a hoard as precious and inexhaustible as that of the Nibelungs. The chord of terror is touched in the eerie visit of the three dead sailor sons in earthly flesh and blood to the wife of Usher's Well, Sweet William's ghost, the rescue of Tam Lin on Halloween, when Fairyland pays attend to Hell, the return of Clerk Saunders to his mistress, True Thomas's ride to Fairyland, when "For 40 days and 40 nights he wade through red blood to the knee, and he saw neither sun nor moon, but heard the roaring of the sea." The medieval romances of chivalry, which embody stories handed down by oral tradition, are set in an atmosphere of supernatural wonder and enchantment. In Malory's Morte d'Arthur, Sir Lancelot goes by night into the Chapel Perilous, wherein there is only a dim light burning, and steals from the corpse a sword and a piece of silk to heal the wounds of a dying knight. Sir Galahad sees a fiend leap out of a tomb amid a cloud of smoke. Gawain's ghost, with those of the knights and ladies for whom he has done battle in life, appears to warn the king not to begin the fight against Modred on a certain day. In the romance Sir Amadas, the ghost of a merchant, whose corpse the knight has duteously redeemed from the hands of creditors, succours him at need. The shadow of terror lurks even amid the beauty of Spenser's Fairyland. In the windings of its forests we come upon dark caves, mysterious castles and huts, from which there start fearsome creatures like Despair or the giant Orgoglio, hideous hags like Occasion, wicked witches and enchanters or frightful beings like the ghostly Malaga, who wore as his helmet a dead man's skull, and rode upon a tiger as swift as the wind. The Elizabethan dramatists were fascinated by the terrors of the invisible world. Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, round whose name are clustered legends centuries old concerning bargains between man and devil, the apparitions and witches in Macbeth, the dead hand, the corpse-like images, the mask of madmen, the tomb maker and the passing bell in Webster's sombre tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi, prove triumphantly the dramatic possibilities of terror. As a foil to his Masque of Queens, 1609, Ben Jonson introduced 12 loathy witches, with Ate as their leader, and embellished his description of their profane rites with details culled from James I's treatise on demonology and from learned ancient authorities. In The Pilgrim's Progress, Despair, who had as many lives as a cat, his wife Diffidence at Doubting Castle, and Maul and Slaygood are the ogres of popular story, whose acquaintance Bunyan had made in chapbooks during his ungodly youth. Hobgoblins, devils and fiends, sturdy rogues like the three brothers Faintheart, Mistrust and Guilt, who set upon Littlefaith in Dead Man's Lane, lend the excitement of terror to Christian's journey to the celestial city. The widespread belief in witches and spirits to which Browne and Burton and many others bear witness in the 17th century lived on in the 18th century, although the attitude of the polite in the Age of Reason was ostensibly incredulous and superior. A scene in one of the Spectator essays illustrates pleasantly the state of popular opinion. Addison, lodging with a good-natured widow in London, returns home one day to find a group of girls sitting by candlelight, telling one another ghost stories. At his entry they are abashed, but on the widow's assuring them that it is only the gentlemen, they resume, while Addison, pretending to be absorbed in his book at the far end of the table, covertly listens to their tales of ghosts that, pale as ashes, had stood at the feet of the bed or walked over a churchyard by moonlight, and others who had been conjured into the Red Sea for disturbing people's rest." In another essay, Addison shows that he is strongly inclined to believe in the existence of spirits, though he repudiates the ridiculous superstitions which prevailed in his day, and Sir Roger de Coverley frankly confesses his belief in witches. Defoe, in the preface to his essay on the history and reality of apparitions, states uncompromisingly, "I must tell you, good people, that he that is not able to see the devil in whatever shape he is pleased to appear in, he is not really qualified to live in this world, no, not in the quality of a common inhabitant." Epworth Rectory, the home of John Wellesley's father, was haunted in 1716 to 1717 by a persevering ghost called Old Geoffrey, whose exploits have been recorded with a gravity and circumstantial exactitude that remind us of Defoe's narrative concerning the ghostly Mrs. Veal in her Scoured Silk. John Wesley declares stoutly that he is convinced of the literal truth of the story of one Elizabeth Hobson, who professed to have been visited on several occasions by supernatural beings. He upholds, too, the authenticity of the notorious drummer of Tedworth, whose escapades are described in chapbooks and in Glanvill's Sadducemus Triumphantus, 1666, a book in which he was keenly interested. In his journal, May 25, 1768, he remarks, quote, "It is true that the English in general, and indeed most men of learning in Europe, have given up all accounts of witches and apparitions as mere old wives' fables. I am sorry for it, and I willingly take this opportunity of entering my solemn protest against this violent compliment which so many that believe the Bible pay to those who do not believe it." End quote. The Cock Lane ghost gained very general credit and was considered by Mrs. Nickleby a personage of some importance when she boasted to Miss La Creevy that her great-grandfather went to school with him, or her grandmother with the thirsty woman of Tutbury. The appearance of Lord Lyttelton's ghost in 1779 was described by Dr. Johnson, who was also disposed to believe in the Cock Lane ghost, as the most extraordinary thing that had happened in his day. There is abundant evidence that the people of the 18th century were extremely credulous, yet in literature there is a tendency to look askance at the supernatural as at something wild and barbaric. Such ghosts as presume to steal into poetry are amazingly tame and even elegant in their speech and deportment. In Mallet's William and Margaret, 1759, which was founded on a scrap of an old ballad out of The Night of the Burning Pestle, Margaret's wraith rebukes her false lover in a long and dignified oration. But spirits were shy of appearing in an age where they were more likely to be received with banter than with dread. Dr. Johnson expresses the attitude of his age when, in referring to Gray's poem The Bard, he remarks, quote, "To select a singular event and swell it to a giant's bulk by fabulous appendages of spectres and predictions has little difficulty. For he that forsakes the probable may always find the marvellous. And it has little use. We are affected only as we believe. We are improved only as we find something to be imitated or declined." End quote, 1780. The dictum that we are affected only as we believe is open to grave doubt. We are often thrown into a state of trepidation simply through the power of imagination. We are wise after the event, like Partridge at the play. Quote, "No, no, sir. Ghosts don't appear in such dresses as that neither, and if it was really a ghost, it could do one no harm at such a distance, and in so much company. And yet, if I was frightened, I am not the only person." End quote. The supernatural, which persisted always in legends handed down from one generation to another on the lips of living people, has not lost its power to thrill and alarm, and gradually worked its way back into literature. Although Gray and Collins do not venture far beyond the bounds of the natural, they were in sympathy with the popular feelings of superstitious terror and realised how effective they would be in poetry. Collins, in his Ode on the Superstitions of the Scottish Highlands, adjures Home, the author of Douglas, to sing, quote, "How, framing hideous spells in Sky's lone isle, the gifted wizard seer lodged in the wintry cave with fate's fell spear, or in the depths of East's dark forests dwells, how they whose sight such dreary dreams engross, with their own vision oft astonished droop, when o'er the wintry strath or quaggy moss they see the gliding ghost's unbodied troop." Burns, in the foreword to Halloween, 1785, writes in the enlightened spirit of the 18th century, but in the poem itself throws himself wholeheartedly into the hopes and fears that agitate the lovers. He owed much to an old woman who had lived in his home in infancy. Quote, "She had the largest collection in the country of tales and songs concerning devils, ghosts, fairies, brownies, witches, warlocks, spunkies, kelpies, elf candles, deadlights, wraiths, apparitions, canatrapes, giants, enchanted towers, dragons, and other trumpery. This cultivated the latent seeds of poetry, but had so strong an effect on my imagination that to this hour, in my nocturnal rambles, I sometimes keep a sharp lookout in suspicious places. It often takes an effort of philosophy to shake off these idle terrors." End quote. Tam O'Shanter, written for Captain Grose, was perhaps based on a Scottish legend, learnt at the Inglenook in childhood from this old wife, or perhaps, quote, by some old hollet haunted biggin, or kirk deserted by its riggin, end quote, from Captain Grose himself, who made to quake, quote, ilk ghaist that haunts old hall or chammer, ye gypsy gang that deal in glamour, and you deep read in hell's black grammar, warlocks and witches, end quote. In it, Burns reveals with lively reality the terrors that assail the reveller on his homeward way through the storm. Quote, past the Burks and Meeklestane, where drunken Charlie bracks neck bane, and through the winds and by the cairn, where hunters fanned the murdered bairn, and near the thorn, aboon the well, where Mungo's mother hanged hersel. End quote. For sheer terror, the wild, fantastic witch dance seen through a Gothic window in the ruins of Kirk Alloway, with the light of humour strangely glinting through, has hardly been surpassed. The ballad collections, beginning with Percy's Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, 1705, brought poets back to the original sources of terror in popular tradition, and helped to revive the latent feelings of awe, wonder and fear. In Coleridge's Ancient Manor, the skeleton ship with its ghastly crew, the spectre woman and her death mate, the sensations of the mariner alone on a wide, wide sea, seize on our imagination with irresistible power. The very substance of the poem is woven with the supernatural. The dream imagery is thrown into relief by occasional touches of reality, the lighthouse, the church on the cliff, the glimpses of the wedding, the quiet song of the hidden brook in the leafy month of June. We, like the mariner, after loneliness so awful that, quote, God himself there scarce seemed to be, end quote, welcome the firm earth beneath our feet, and the homely sound of the vesper bell. In Christabel, we float dreamily through scenes as unearthly and ephemeral as the misty moonlight, and the words in which Coleridge conjures up his vision fall into music of magic beauty. The opening of the poem creates a sense of foreboding, and the horror of the serpent maiden is subtly suggested through her effect on Christabel. Coleridge hints at the terrible with artistic reticence. In Kublai Khan, the chasm is, quote, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as ever beneath the waning moon was haunted by a woman wailing for her demon lover, end quote. The poetry of Keats is often mysterious and suggestive of terror. The description of the Gothic hall in The Eve of St. Agnes, quote, in all the house was heard no human sound. A chain-drooped lamp was flickering by each door. The arras, rich with horseman, hawk and hound, fluttered in the besieging wind's uproar, and the long carpets rose along the gusty floor. End quote. The serpent maiden Lamia, who, quote, seemed at once some penanced lady elf, some demon's mistress, or the demon's self, end quote. The grim story in Isabella of Lorenzo's ghost, who, quote, moaned a ghostly undersong, like hoarse night gusts, sepulchral briars along, end quote. All lead us over the borderland. In a rejected stanza of the Ode on Melancholy, he abandons the horrible, quote, though you should build a bark of dead men's bones, and rear a phantom gibbet for a mast, stitch shrouds together for a sail, with groans to fill it out, blood-stained and aghast. Although your rudder be a dragon's tail long severed, yet still hard with agony, your cordage, large uprootings from the skull of bald Medusa, certes, you would fail to find the melancholy. End quote. Keats's melancholy is not to be found amid images of horror. Quote, she dwells with beauty, beauty that must die, and joy, whose hand is ever at his lips, bidding adieu. End quote. In La Belle Dame Sans Merci, he conveys with delicate touch the memory of the vision which haunts the night, alone and palely loitering. We see it through his eyes. Quote, I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame Sans Merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside." From effects so exquisitely wrought as these, it seems almost profane to turn to the crude attempts of such poets as Monk Lewis or Southey to sound the note of terror. Yet they too, in their fashion, played a part in the Renaissance of wonder. Coleridge, fascinated by the spirit of gramarye in Burger's Lenore, etherealised and refined it. Scott and Lewis gloried in the gruesome details and spirited rhythm of the ballad, and in their supernatural poems wished to startle and terrify, not to awe, their readers. Those who revel in phosphorescent lights and in the rattle of the skeleton are apt to o'erleap themselves, and Scott's Glenfinlas, Lewis's Alonzo the Brave and the Fair Imogene, and Southey's Old Woman of Berkeley fall into the category of the grotesque. Hogg intentionally mingles the comic and terrible in his poem The Witch of Fife, but his prose stories reveal his power of creating an atmosphere of diablerie, undisturbed by intrusive mockery. In the poem Kilmeny, he handles an uncanny theme with dreamy beauty. From the earliest times to the present day, writers of fiction have realised the force of supernatural terror. In the Babylonica of Iamblichus, the lovers evade their pursuers by passing as spectres. The scene of the romance is laid in tombs, caverns and robbers' dens, a setting remarkably like that of the Gothic story. Into the English novel of the first half of the 18th century, however, the ghost dares not venture. The innate desire for the marvellous was met at this period not by the novel, but by oral traditions, and by such works as Gallant's translation of the Arabian Nights, the Countess d'Aulnoy's collection of fairy tales, Perrault's Contes de Mermaoy, chapbooks setting forth medieval legends of the Wandering Jew, the Demon Frigate, or Dr. Faustus, and interspersed with anecdotes of freaks, monsters and murderers, satisfied the craving for excitement among humbler readers. Smollett, who, in his Adventures of Ferdinand, Count Fathom, 1753, seems to have been experimenting with new devices for keeping alive the interest of a picaresque novel, anticipates the methods of Mrs. Radcliffe. Although he sedulously avoids introducing the supernatural, he hovers perilously on the threshold. The publication of The Castle of Otranto in 1764 was not so wild an adventure as Walpole would have his readers believe. The age was ripe for the reception of the marvellous. The supernatural had, as we have seen, begun to find its way back into poetry in the work of Gray and Collins. In Macpherson's Ossian, which was received with acclamation in 1760-63, the mountains, heaths and lakes are haunted by shadowy, superstitious fears. Dim-seen ghosts wail over the wastes. There is abundant evidence that authentic stories of ghostly appearances were often heard with respect. Those who eagerly explored Walpole's Gothic castle, and who took pleasure in Miss Reeve's well-trained ghost, had previously enjoyed the thrill of chimney-corner legends. The idea of the gigantic apparition was derived, no doubt, from the old legend of the figure seen by Wallace on the field of battle. The limbs strewn carelessly about the staircase, and the gallery of the castle belonged to a giant, very like those who are worsted by the heroes of popular story. Godwin, in an unusual flight of fancy, amused himself by tracing a certain similitude between Caleb Williams and Bluebeard, between Cloudsley and the Babes in the Wood, and planned a story on the analogy of Sleeping Beauty, in which the hero was to have the faculty of unexpectedly falling asleep for 20, 30 or 100 years. Mrs. Radcliffe, who, so far as we may judge, did not draw her characters from the creatures of flesh and blood around her, seems to have adopted some of the familiar figures of old story. Emily's guardian, Montoni, in The Mysteries of Udolpho, like the unscrupulous uncle in Godwin's Cloudsley, may well have been descended from the wicked uncle of folktale. The cruel stepmother is disguised as a haughty, scheming marchioness in the Sicilian romance. The ogre drops his club, assumes a veneer of polite refinement, and relies on the more gentlemanlike method of the dagger and stiletto for gaining his ends. The banditti and robbers who infest the countryside in Gothic fiction are time-honoured figures. Travellers in Thessaly, in Apuleius's Golden Ass, like the fugitives in Shelley's Zastrozzi and St. Irvyne, find themselves in robbers' caves. The Gothic castle, suddenly encountered in a dark forest, is boldly transported from fairyland and set down in Italy, Sicily or Spain. The Chamber of Horrors, with its alarming array of scalps or skeletons, is civilised beyond recognition and becomes the deserted wing of an abbey, concealing nothing worse than one discarded wife, emaciated and dispirited, but still alive. The ghost story which Ludovico reads in the haunted chamber of Udolpho is described by Mrs. Radcliffe as a Provençal tale, but is in reality common to the folklore of all countries. The restless ghost, who yearns for the burial of his corpse, is as ubiquitous as the wandering Jew. In the Iliad he appears as the shade of Patroclus, pleading with Ulysses for his funeral rites. According to the letter of the younger Pliny, he haunts a house in Athens, clanking his chains. He is found in every land, in every age. His feminine counterpart presented herself to Dickens' nurse, requiring her bones, which were under a glass case, to be "interred with every undertaking solemnity, up to £24 in another particular place." Melmoth the Wanderer, when he becomes the wooer of Imali, seems almost like a reincarnation of the demon lover. The wandering ball of fire that illuminates the dusky recesses of so many Gothic abbeys is but another manifestation of the fate moon, which shines, foreboding death, after Thorgunna's funeral in the Icelandic saga. The witchcraft and demonology that attracted Scott and monk Lewis may be traced far beyond Sinclair's Satan's Invisible World Discovered, 1685, Beauvert's Pandemonium or the Devil's Cloister Opened, 1683, or Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, 1584, to Ulysses' Invocation of the Spirits of the Dead, to the Idyls of Theocritus, and to the Hebrew narrative of Saul's visit to the cave of Endor. There are incidents in the Gold Mass as horrid as any of those devised by the writers of Gothic romance. It would indeed be no easy task to fashion scenes more terrifying than the mutilation of Socrates in the Gold Mass by the witch who tears out his heart and stops the wound with a sponge, which falls out when he stops to drink at a river, or that the strange apparition of a ragged old woman who vanishes after leading the way to the room where the baker's corpse hangs behind the door. Though the title assumes a special literary significance at the close of the 18th century, the tale of terror appeals to deeply rooted instincts and belongs, therefore, to every age and clime. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Timothy Ferguson, Gold Coast, Australia.